That's this is
Perfect.
probably what we need. Okay, awesome.
Awesome. And then can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. Is it like a funky size at all? Or is it looking
No,
good?
I think it's perfect. Fits
All
well,
right.
like on the screen.
Okay.
I'm gonna mute now.
Awesome. All right. Perfect. Well, thanks for joining, guys. I really appreciate it. I know like this is literally the busiest time of the year for everyone, and therapists included, but I think that's why it's like extra important to like take some time to like, do some self-care, and really um yeah, focus on, the challenges that come up with this time of year. So that's kind of why we're doing our navigating family dynamics through the holidays presentation. Um, I'm Megan Matusky. I'm a therapist. I'm the owner and a therapist at Calm Mind Therapy. We're a small mental health therapy practice, just located in Ardmore, Pennsylvania. We work with all types of people, kids, teens, adults, families. My background is kind of working in like family therapy and in-home family systems work. So I really like talking about family dynamics. And even when I'm not working with families, there's always family dynamics to discuss, even in the individual. So I think it's always really interesting to talk about. So I was really excited that Jen asked me to do this. Awesome. So I was like, I thought we could talk about like a little bit about just kind of the holiday highs and lows. So like there are so many positives that can come with this time of year, this like Thanksgiving through New Year's time. It's we get to spend time with the people we love. We get like fun activities and events, things that we look forward to maybe all year. There's a lot of community connection, where we can go and we're sharing a similar experience with people. Time off. Often we get some breaks around this time of year, which can be super helpful. Giving and receiving gifts can be some people's love language, and it's like one of our favorite things to do, and just to get the joy of giving a good present. And then also there's a lot of religious fulfillment that happens at this time of year. We get to engage in a lot of different holidays for different religions, which I think is incredible and can bring a lot of like grounding. So those are some of the holiday highs, but then we also have these holiday lows that can come with it. And not everybody experiences all of them the same, but the common ones that we can kind of see is there's a lot of family expectations this time of year, a lot of kind of demands on our family schedule, what people need from us, a lot of family time together, which can cause some conflict. Also, as we mentioned at the beginning of this meeting, really busy schedules. We're all slammed. We have the normal expectations of regular life and then the expectations of our, holiday life, which can be a lot. Financial pressures are big. Grief and loneliness can be a big thing that comes out. Holidays are a time where we can spend time with family and then also remember people maybe that aren't connected to our family, and that can bring up a lot of emotions. Also for women or female presenting folks, motherhood and caretaking roles really amp up at this time. A lot can fall onto the person holding that primary caretaker role. And then also perfectionism of what we want the holidays to look like. Comparing ourselves to Instagram and Hallmark movies, and this idea that we have to get it right. And that can be all a lot. So this idea of it can be a dichotomy. We can have both happening this time of year. And so the one that we really wanted to like hone in on and kind of focus on for this presentation was this idea of like family stressors. And so again, families can be a source of a lot of joy and connection and love and support. And they can also be a source of great stress. And that is across the board for everybody, no matter what family. And there's a lot of reasons that families can cause us stress and conflict in our life. And here's just some of them, but some of the big ones are like we fall into some of these old family roles and patterns when we go back into our family systems. You might be an adult in the real world most of the time, but when we go back into our families, we can fall back into those childlike roles and can fulfill old patterns. We also there can be boundary issues with families and especially when we're creating our own families. What do we allow? What roles do we still hold? What can we say yes to? What do we have to say no to? That puts a lot of strain on us. A lot of emotional triggers because no one knows how to trigger us like our siblings or our mothers or our fathers. They know us so well and they know the exact buttons to push to bring out a big response. So also always something to be aware of. Within families, like the idea we talked about before, like uneven distribution of labor. So men and women. This can often be women tend to take on more of that labor distribution, and it can cause burnout and conflict. Pressure to please everyone. There's like people pleasers in the room. Wanting everybody to be happy and to be happy with us can spend a lot of time trying to make our families happy, and then inevitably maybe not making ourselves so happy. And then also, again, the idea of grief and loss. So we're dealing with kind of maybe some of that sadness around some of the holidays. So a lot of these family stressors can start to come up for us. And so like digging more into the idea of family roles. And I think it's like all of us have had the experience of being in our childhood house and starting to yell like we're a teenager again and being like, what just happened? Like, who am I now? And it is truly because like our families, there are certain roles and ways that we interact with one another in family systems that really do come out when we're back in the family. And usually there's roles that like these are kind of some of these stereotypical roles that we often see in families, and different siblings and people within the family, they take on the roles. So there's the idea of like the golden child or the problem child or the peacemaker or the parents like surrogate partner that kind of co-parents or the manipulator. And often like, you know, people in families get dealt these roles. The problem child gets kind of dealt the role of the problem child, and therefore, whenever they do anything that's problem child esque, it's like, oh, yep, there's the problem child being the problem child again, and we almost live into those roles. And so, when we grow and we leave those family systems, we individuate, we become our own person, but our families don't often grow the same way that we do. And so we can step back into the family system and immediately step back into some of these roles that maybe don't feel the healthiest for us or don't actually feel the most connected to us in the present. So those family roles can cause a lot of stress and distress when we go back into them. We also have the idea of like family patterns. So not only are there disposed roles that we will step into in our family when we go back home for the holidays, there are also patterns that every single family has, and we often every family will have in perpetuity. And so this is the idea that almost like our families, we tend to fight about the same thing forever. The type of thing might change, the trigger might be different, but if we go back and trace all of our family patterns, usually they look exactly the same every single time. And so, like, this is an example of a family pattern that might show up. I'll walk into Christmas dinner and my sister says, "Oh, your shoes are ugly." What is this really? Maybe my sister's feeling kind of insecure about her outfit or about herself and needs to kind of pull somebody else down. We know that happens. When she does that to me, I immediately say, "That's so rude. Why would you say that to me? My feelings are hurt. I'm feeling not good, whatever." Then, mom likes to jump in. She wants to be the referee because mom really struggles when people are fighting and really needs everybody to get along. And so she starts to jump in and says, "Hey, you got to cut it out." Then this can make, me feel ganged up on, or that I'm starting to yell more, where it's like everybody always takes her side. She was the one that said something mean to me, but now you guys are coming after me. And this is like a triangulation. So now it's 2v1, and the problem child starts to arise, where it's like, I would be the one that's always yelling and getting angry in the family. And everybody's like, "You're always doing this." And so then this would breed this into the family fight that, yep, we're getting into a fight once again. The only way to solve this is to leave early because I can't be around these people. And creates this feeling of disconnection and kind of like a breakup of the family. And typically, it's like most families don't have time to sit back down and talk about this pattern and say, what just happened? What was underpinning it? What were the deeper things going on that created this conflict? Instead, usually it's we just don't talk for a few days, or there's just some distance, and then there's a just natural reconnection. And some sort of pattern like this will happen again. Next time, maybe it's my sister saying something about my sweater. My sister's lovely, but but for an example. And so it's like everybody's family has a pattern. It is the same fight held over and over and over again it's the underpinning, it's the triggers are here, but the underpinning of it is always something deeper and emotional. And so this can cause a lot of family conflict too, because inevitably, if we're together for a long period of time, there's a chance that this family pattern of ours is going to show up in some particular way. So I'm curious. So this is some of our kind of asking you guys for your feedback of I'm thinking, does anybody have any family patterns that they're kind of aware of? Is there like a common fight that kind of shows up in your family every year around the holidays? Is there something that we can kind of start thinking about and prepping ahead for? Because if we start to learn our family patterns, if we start to learn our family roles, we have a much better chance of not engaging them or being able to walk away from them or being able to see what they are before they actually show up in the first place. So I'm curious, like if anybody wants to take a second and even just like maybe start jotting down, like what is your family pattern? What tends to happen before the fight starts? How, what happens after the fight ends? How does your family tend to come back together in a way? And just start to note, like, do you see anything that is similar, consistent, kind of frequent within those dynamics? Um, and if anybody is feeling brave, if they would want to share, amazing. If not, totally welcome to just kind of start jotting that down and like thinking with this broader context. So that way we can start to kind of get ahead of some of these conflicts. So curious, anybody want to share? And if not, that is totally fine. But it's like I definitely do. I like would say like all of you thinking about, yeah, naming who takes on what family roles in my family. Um, what is this pattern that we tend to fall into? And once we kind of name it, then start saying, like, is there a way I could react differently in these moments? To not have it always end at the same place. And so if anybody like wants to share at any point or wants to talk more about it, perfect. If not, that is okay. And just like something to think about and to kind of keep in mind moving through the holidays. And so then the next piece, so it's like always like our first idea is like we need to understand our families, understand how they function, understand the roles that we take, the roles that we play, how we engage in these patterns together. The next piece is thinking about boundaries. Because if we want to start changing some of these family patterns, we have to start doing something. And so I think boundaries is a great way to kind of start doing something that fights against some of these more moments of tension or conflict or whatever. And I do think boundaries like definitely gets I think overused a little bit. I think sometimes when we talk about boundaries, we're not talking about them as specifically as might be helpful. Because there are very actually specific things that boundaries kind of look like and different ways boundaries can show up in our families. And so a boundary really is just like a limit that kind of separates you from another person. And oftentimes I think boundaries are framed as requests. So you can say, my boundary is that I don't want you talking about, uh, you know, uh, my like income or whatever. That's my boundary. But requests we actually really have no power over. So we can ask people to, not talk about certain things or not go deeper on certain conversations, but we actually can't control anybody else. So, somebody who's going to be like a cousin that's going to be nosy about how much are you making this year or whatever, they're going to say it regardless. And a boundary is actually what we then do ourselves to end or remove ourselves from that difficult situation. So a boundary is always something that we are doing. It's a request is something that we'd like from somebody. We can always ask for requests, but then the boundary is what are we going to do to hold a line to make sure that that doesn't continue? And even when we're thinking of like boundaries more, there are different types of boundaries and different types of families have different types of boundaries. And boundaries often they do look different. So it's like taking into cultural context as well. This is kind of an idea of more of Western boundaries, but boundaries do look different culturally. Um, but a Western boundary concept is the idea that we have porous, healthy, and rigid boundaries. So porous boundaries are this idea of it's like almost this like dotted line where pretty much everything is going between one another. So if you're thinking of like parents are sitting up here and then kids kind of are sitting down here, a porous boundary would mean parents are sharing everything with kids, all emotions, all feelings, adult conversations, everything's getting shared between the two because there aren't hard lines in a porous boundary. There's often a lot of people pleasing that happens in porous boundaries where your feelings also almost become the other person's feelings. And so if they're upset, you will do anything to make them feel better because you cannot tolerate them feeling unhealthy because they are you, you are them. And it's this idea of it's maybe really hard to say no if we have really porous boundaries because if we say no, that feels like it's hurting the other person. They get upset. And we just then have to say yes because we don't want anybody to be upset. And so porous boundaries can be really hard to live in because we are always feeling everybody else's emotions at all times within our family, and it feels like we almost explode a little bit because we're holding too much or more than we need to be holding. On the other end, so like that's one end of the spectrum. It's like these kind of really porous, everything is shared and open and people pleasing and can't say no. The other side is very rigid boundaries. So this is almost like a firm line. You know, like parents are here, kids are here. There is no sharing. We don't talk about deep things. We don't talk about anything that's heavy or hard. We keep it very surface level. Vulnerability is not good. So saying things are difficult, we don't do that. That feels kind of icky and gross. And there's strict cutoffs that if you don't follow these rules, then you're out of the family. Then you're outside of this. So this is like the form of a more rigid boundary, which also can be really difficult because it doesn't often allow for a lot of like emotional depth in our relationships. And if we try to cross that boundary, the consequences are really, really strict. So it's like those are the two ends, and this is a spectrum. So boundaries can shift kind of in and out, and also can be different per person within a family. But those are the two ends, and then in the middle is kind of what we want to look for healthier boundaries. So this is this idea of like it's a lot of give and take, and there's independence. We're allowed to be our own people with our own thoughts and our own feelings, and that doesn't necessarily harm the other person. We can offer forgiveness to one another. We're allowed to mess up, and we're allowed to say that person just had a bad day. It's okay. There's mutual trust involved that we believe that each person has our best interests at heart and really does love and care for one another. And being appropriate emotions get shared within the family, but not all the emotions or none of the emotions. It's like that healthy middle ground. So I'm curious, even just thinking about the idea of like porous, healthy, and rigid boundaries, how is that feeling towards everybody? Is everybody getting kind of a sense of what that might look like in a relationship?
I have so much background noise, but yes. Yeah, I think I'm like the queen of being terrible at boundaries. So it's like makes sense that there's like different levels of them.
Hmm. And boundaries are really, really hard. And especially like, again, we really only know what we grow up in. And so we're usually modeled different types of boundaries, and that's what we experience. And so it's hard to change the way we exist with others when all we've known is maybe one way or another way. I'm curious, anybody else have any boundaries thoughts? Well, awesome. Well, we're gonna keep kind of talking on the boundaries front. So like we talked about kind of like the philosophical idea of boundaries and the spectrum of boundaries and kind of what they look like. But then like, okay, what are healthy boundaries really? You know, like what do they sound like? How do they exist in like actual practice? So the first one, and I think can be a really hard one, especially if we tend to be some like people pleasing personalities, is the idea of like saying no. So sometimes holding a boundary is literally just saying, no, I can't do that. No, I can't make it. Like, thank you for the invite, but no, I'm going to go to my husband's family for Thanksgiving this year. It is really hard because typically, again, our families love us and they want to spend time with us. So by us saying no, it can sometimes feel like a rejection to the people in our life. And especially if we have very porous boundaries, it's very hard to say no. But in the end, by saying no, and we don't have to say no all the time, because if we say no all the time, that's very rigid boundaries. And so that's not what we're looking for either. But this idea of we can have this give and take and you say yes, but then also say, sorry, this isn't working for me this year. Like, let's figure out some other time to meet, or let's do something that works for both of us. We can say no and hold that line if it's not working for us, and then also offer compromise. in the moving forward, because we don't have to be so rigid with it. So saying no is a huge one. I'm curious, how do people feel about the idea of saying no? Is this something that comes easily for you? Is this something that is a challenge?
I always struggle with saying no. I always like lean to say yes on everything. So
Mm-hmm.
personally, but
Me
I
too.
Oh,
mean,
I know.
I struggle to say no too.
Yeah, what comes up for you guys, do you think, when that saying no feels so hard?
I just don't want to like disappoint or anger my family. I don't,
Mm-hmm.
if I say no, like I don't want to offend or like, get into an argument. So I'm like, I'll just say yes.
It just feels easier. I don't want
Yes.
I don't want the conflict or the resistance. Yep, nope, totally get that. And so it is true. It's like when we hold boundaries, especially if boundaries haven't really existed in our family before, there can be some pushback because we're doing something different. Like we talked about that pattern kind of earlier, that family pattern. And we're doing something against the pattern if we're going to say no and hold boundaries. And so when we say no, and it's imagining if we have a toddler, if we say no to a toddler, initially they're going to be upset. But if we keep holding that line, consistently, people will start to acknowledge, oh, okay, well, now I know where the boundary is. I'm not going to keep pushing it. So it does take time and effort and consistency with us practicing it, but it is really hard because, again, us people pleasers, we want everybody to be happy with us, even to the detriment of ourselves, because we might be overextending, but that's okay as long as everybody's happy. We also have um, the idea of like keeping time can be a way to set healthy boundaries. So maybe we're not saying no, but maybe we're saying we're going to arrive at dinner at 4 and we're going to leave at 7. We're offering people in our lives something, but we're not giving them an endless amount of time or an endless amount of access to us. And sometimes this can feel a little bit easier than a hard no. But it also requires us to then actually get up and leave at that point. Because again, the holidays are busy. There are a lot of families and people to see and things to do. And so we don't have endless time to spend with everybody. And so sometimes being able to say, I will do this, but I will do this for this much time, it actually then can like alleviate some of our stress and allow us to do all the things we want without feeling overrun. Because otherwise, if we say yes to everything and we have no time limits, we'll never get in everything that we want to do. We can also, like a way to set boundaries is to ask for what we need. A lot of the times especially with our families, we want them to almost be mind readers. We want them to know what we need or know that something is stressing us or know that something is too much and therefore just not ask, which ideally would be amazing. I always tell my clients, like, if I could read minds, my job would be so much easier. I'd be so much of a better therapist. But unfortunately, none of us have that ability. And instead, in order for people to do what we want, we have to ask for it, which can feel really hard. It can feel like, we're putting somebody out or we're making them do too much. But what we're actually doing is we're just conveying a boundary. We're conveying what we need from them and how they can kind of meet us halfway. I'm curious, how do people feel about asking for what you need? I know this can be a tricky one too. Like, I know I'm a person that I tend to take on a lot and I will tend to do it all myself because I don't want to necessarily burden others with things. And I'm really trying to work on letting some of that go and asking for help and telling people what I need from them because otherwise I learned like that tips me right into burnout and especially this time of year. Any other thoughts? Well, let me know if anything comes up. So the next one that we have is this idea of like naming your feelings. So again, sometimes and this depends. Not everybody deserves our feelings. Not everybody can hold our emotions, and because that is a little bit vulnerable. But sometimes by stating like 2 Thanksgivings in the same day is giving me anxiety. Like I can only handle one. Sometimes by naming the emotion and naming what this event is doing for ourselves and what emotions bringing up in us, oftentimes people can hear that a little bit easier. And usually it's sometimes people will hear the no and they're not necessarily thinking about us. But when we can say, this is how it's impacting me and how it's impacting my emotions and my mental state, people can tend to hear that a little bit easier. And it gives a reason. It gives a reason for why this is feeling like so much. And again, not everybody in our life deserves our emotions. Not everybody in our life can be trusted with our emotions and with that level of vulnerability. But some people in our lives, they love us deeply. They just almost get in their own way. And sometimes we need to pause them and say, like, this is causing me a lot of anxiety. This is making me feel very overwhelmed. Is there something else that we can do here? And usually, when we somebody that really loves us and cares about our well being, they'll say, oh my gosh, I didn't realize. How can I shift and adjust? So, by naming our feelings and using our feelings as a model, we can kind of help get what we need from others. And then our others is like being comfortable with the discomfort. So when we use these boundaries, and especially if we're in a more kind of porous boundaried family, people are going to get upset. They're going to get upset. We're doing something different. We're changing the family pattern. They're not going to like it, and they're not going to like it the first 5 times that we do it. And so then what we have to do, and then especially if we're those people pleasers, we have to figure out how we're going to then take care of ourselves. So sometimes when we have to set a boundary, there has to be a little bit of prep and care around it because it's going to be hard. We usually probably don't want to do it because what you said earlier, like it's so much easier to say yes and just go with the flow. And so boundaries are not just a thing that we can just do in the moment. Sometimes they need to be something that we take some time around and we really plan. And then once we say, all right, I'm going to hold this boundary, I'm not going to sleep over this year, instead I need to go home. We can name the other person's emotion, say, I know that you're feeling disappointed. And then even though the person we love is feeling disappointed, it doesn't mean we necessarily have to change what we're doing in those moments. And what we can sit with their disappointment, we can allow them to be disappointed. We do not have to expect them to be happy about holding these boundaries. And then we can also kind of go back to ourselves and say, okay, what do I need to do to make myself feel better that I'm making somebody upset, and that's okay. We're allowed to make people in our lives upset sometimes. And so this could be, do we have to do some self-care? Do we have to spend some time with a different loved one that can be a little bit more supportive? Do we have to, go for a walk or pet an animal? Sometimes when we hold a boundary, we then need to have to take care of ourselves a little bit afterwards to make sure that we're able to stick to it. Because the worst thing in the world is you say, nope, I can't go to your house on Thanksgiving. Our mother says, oh my God, but I look forward to it every year and you can't be here. And I just feel so alone. And they guilt trip us. And we just all did this beautiful, nice work of holding a boundary, but the guilt and our own anxiety around it starts to come up. And then we flip flop. And then we say, okay, never mind, we'll come, never mind, we'll make it. And we just did the hard part and we were almost there, but we didn't get to see it through. So we can acknowledge there's going to be a lot of discomfort with boundary setting and that's okay. We're allowed to be uncomfortable with it. It doesn't mean that we're wrong or we're bad. We're actually going to find that we can then start to breathe a little bit more in our holiday life. So I'm curious, like we're going to practice, so I think for everybody here, like thinking about, are there some boundaries that you want to try to hold this holiday season? And they can be very small boundaries. I'm not going to make the mashed potatoes this year. Something really, really light. They can be bigger boundaries of, yeah, I just can't make it. We can't do Thanksgiving together this year, but maybe we'll figure out something next year. But thinking about things coming up, are there any boundaries that you feel like, my life could feel a little bit better if I hold these in place? And then also thinking about when are those boundaries going to be challenged? Who are going to be the most difficult people with holding these boundaries? Are there people that are easier to hold boundaries with? And maybe we start with them because we know it's not going to be quite as difficult. But just starting to think, okay, what is the boundary I want to hold? And then what is the pushback I'm going to get on that? Because we're kind of prepping ahead for this because it's not easy. This is not easy work. And then we go to how am I going to handle the discomfort if there's pushback? If I get guilt tripped, if people kind of ignore it or push around it, what am I going to do so that I can still hold firm with this boundary that I know that I actually really need? And then how do we make you feel better? So then what do we do to make you feel better on the after end after we hold this boundary? So I know it's I feel like TikTok loves to talk about boundaries, but boundaries are actually really, really hard and they're difficult to hold and they're difficult to keep. And so the idea is that, yeah, we need to actually practice this. Like boundaries are a skill. And so we need to practice small and start practicing it in ways that feel comfortable and building our comfort with holding boundaries. Because eventually, if we do it enough, we're actually going to become good at this and it's not going to be quite as scary anymore. I'm curious, like any boundaries that people are, either starting to think of or think that could be good to try to put in place this holiday season.
I have one.
Mhm.
Um,
Awesome. Yeah, Lisa.
we're trying to my family there are not any kids among myself and my sisters, so no grandkids with my parents. And traditionally, every year at Christmas, my parents have everybody at their house. Um, but my boyfriend and I are talking about potentially having kids in the next few years, and we're kind of trying to like change the trajectory of things, of maybe starting to have some more things at our house rather than out at their house, and just proposing that idea in itself of like, oh my gosh, not having Christmas at mom and dad's house for the first time in like 35 years is like
Mhm.
it's like an unbelievable concept.
Yep. Yep. No, and I feel like that is such a place that boundaries kind of are coming up of like, yeah, it's like when we're getting older and the traditions are changing, like how do we propose a change and then hold that firm of saying this is what we're going to do? um it can feel so terrifying. And also it's a again, look at this pattern that you and your family have had for years and years and years. The idea of coming in and trying to change that, the system's not going to love that initially.
Yeah, and is it something that we just go in and just say like, hey guys, this is what we're doing this year. We're gonna have it at our house. You're welcome to come, and if not, great. Maybe we'll see you next year. Like, is that how we
Mhm.
handle it?
Well, and
Okay.
it's so it depends. It's like so, and we'll go into it a little bit next. But so I would say it's like we want to assess the relationship. So we want to assess like, all right, how valuable is this person in this relationship in our life, and therefore how soft do we need to manage them? Like if this is a person I really love, I really don't want them to be hurt. I know this is going to be hard for them. We can soften it. Like we can say like, all right, maybe we're planting the idea this year of like next year we're going to start doing this. We could say no. I think they can handle a little bit more. Like we love you guys. We know we love Christmas, but we think we're going to do something a little bit different this year, and we're going to stay home and seeing if they get the feedback. They and seeing like you could be open to a little negotiation, so maybe you're not doing Christmas morning with them, but you would be open to maybe doing Christmas dinner with them. We can have negotiation in boundary setting and saying, yep, we're not going to do this, but we'd be open to a little bit of that. That's totally fine. Or then you could say like, no, like actually it's a pretty firm boundary, like this is what we want to do this year. And because like we love you guys, we love Christmas, this is going to be really hard, but we really want to start having it ourselves. um, and I know it's going to be hard for you guys, and we're going to try it out and see how it goes. And then you just stick to it. You say that this is what it's going to be. They can be upset. That is okay. And you're going to stick to it. So there's degrees, and it depends on like you and the person and kind of how you want to handle that. Of is there room for negotiation? Nope. Is this a hard, firm boundary? Or is this? Can we take it really slow and just give the idea of it and build them into it later? So there's different ways to do it. Does that kind of answer the question?
Yes, that's super helpful. Thank you. I think yeah, I think our best bet is to probably just make the decision and hold it, and just even if we are even if it's just the two of us sitting there on Christmas Day, which I can't imagine it would be. But I mean, I think that at some point, in order to just change the trajectory a little bit, I think that we have to just really stir it up a bit. So
And so,
we're
and
gonna
then it's
try.
like, no, I think that's great. And then it's just then prepping for the discomfort because people will potentially be disappointed or sad about the change or whatever. And just knowing, like, yep, like I'm actively causing a source of discomfort and I'm doing it because this is what's worked for me and this is what I want for my future. And so it's worthwhile to do. And it's okay. Like, these people I love are going to be upset and they can tolerate that, And so it's like, it's just being kind with yourself too, of holding that and just knowing that it's okay that you're allowed to make people upset. That's fine.
Yeah. Awesome. Thank you.
No problem. Awesome. And so then this kind of comes, we like talked about the idea of setting boundaries. We talked about our patterns. We talked about the idea of setting boundaries and kind of making new patterns. The other thing that I feel like we deal with a lot around the holidays is this idea of like uncomfortable conversations. So I know a lot of people are getting the, why are you not married? Did you gain or lose weight? That's so great. Boomers love to talk about that. When are you having kids? When are you giving your child a sibling? When are you getting a real job? Even politics. These are all pretty like hot, difficult conversations that might come up at our family gatherings. And especially it's like if we're seeing relatives that we don't see all the time, we don't have a lot of closeness. Some of these conversations might be conversations that you feel totally comfortable having with people that you love and family members, but sometimes they're being asked by people that you're like, you don't really actually have that much, don't deserve to have that much access to kind of these deep, vulnerable moments of me. And it can feel like they put us in these like really uncomfortable situations because it's how do we handle this? And so I did my 6 steps of mastering uncomfortable conversations. And these steps, it's like they're also basically the steps of setting a boundary, So we are just using our boundary skills into how do we master having like uncomfortable conversations that maybe we don't want to have with family members. And so, just like I said earlier, so these are kind of our steps. So we're always assessing the value of the relationship because the value of the relationship is going to determine how firm we are with holding these boundaries. If the value of this is something we really care about, we really don't want to upset, we might go about this a little bit differently versus, like Uncle Rick that we see once a year that like we have nothing in common with. Like, okay, maybe we could be a little firmer with him. So I always say it's first we want to assess the relationship, and every relationship is different. So not every person. So some people in our life, they might ask you, oh, when are you having kids? There's somebody you love and you like having these conversations with, and you want to talk about the complexities of that comment. Great, then you can totally have that conversation. But not everybody gets to have that conversation with you. And then step 2 is like clearly state the boundary violation. So somebody says, okay, when are you having kids? We can say, I don't talk about my procreation. I don't get in conversations about having kids. Clearly stating that like I don't do this thing. If we talk about weight, I don't have conversations about people's weights. We are just saying I don't talk about this thing, and we don't have to be mean. We don't have to be rude. We don't have to be like, how could you have asked me that? Like, what were you thinking? We don't have to shame the other person. We just say, yeah, I actually don't talk about this. And so we can keep it as simple and easy as that. Because we don't owe anybody anything. We don't owe anybody conversations that make us feel uncomfortable. We are always allowed to say, no, I actually, this is not something that I feel comfortable talking about. And it's like, then we can either like kind of step 3, step 4, we can change the conversation. So we can either kind of say, oh, this is something I don't feel comfortable talking about, and then pivot into, oh, like what do you think of the turkey this year? Just changing the conversation into something that you do feel comfortable talking about. And you can do this. It doesn't feel super awkward. If you're holding up that line, you're holding that boundary, like, this isn't somewhere I'm going to go. And then you're pivoting somewhere else. If this is a person you want to continue to talk to. You could also, if this is a person that's kind of a repeat offender, you can state what you need a little bit. So you can say, actually in the future, like, could you not ask me about this? In the future, could you not bring up my weight? It makes me feel uncomfortable. We're allowed to say what we need from the other person. And again, we talked about this earlier. This is a way of hosting a healthy boundary of saying, this is what I need from you. And again, this is a request. So they may not listen to it because we're requesting, but we're allowed to say, in the future, this wouldn't be super helpful for me. And we're allowed to say, and I'm not going to talk about it right now. Step 5 is kind of like, what do we do if people don't respect our boundaries? So say, somebody says, oh, did you lose weight? Hey, like, I don't really like to talk about weight. In the future, could you not kind of bring this up in front of me? Change the conversation to talking about the cranberry sauce. But then they continue, wait, no, but like, you look great. And like, I just wanted to know, why are you so offended? Why are you so sensitive to, I can't say anything around you? Could go in that direction. So that is saying that this person is really not respecting this boundary that we held. We said, no, we said, could we do it differently? We changed the conversation. We were trying to move it away from that, and they're still going. And so this is when we can start to get more firm with our boundaries. So instead of just saying, I'm not going to talk about that, then we can just walk away from the conversation. Say, it's good seeing you. I'm actually going to go help Aunt Susie in the kitchen. Again, we can do this all politely. We don't have to be assholes when we're kind of setting these boundaries. We can do it pleasantly and easily. But we're also allowed to not have to engage in this. So the idea of just getting out of the conversation, going somewhere else, going petting the family dog for a little bit, we're always allowed to leave. And that's setting a boundary because, we can ask them to not talk about it, but we can't control what people are going to say. But if they can't talk to us about it, if we leave the room. So that's a kind of like our next step of like the boundaries not respected. If it continues, if the whole family gets involved and they keep talking about our weight and our weight loss and it's feeling really uncomfortable, we're allowed to then say, hey guys, like this was great, it was nice seeing you, like, but we're actually going to head out now. Again, we don't have to be mean, we don't have to get, oh my gosh, how can you say this, why do you keep talking about, you don't listen to us. We can say, that's okay, I'll catch up with you guys tomorrow. We're allowed to leave the event. And that's if it feels really extreme, because usually just removing ourselves from the conversation, that says plenty. Holding a boundary and just saying, I don't talk about this, that usually is enough to calm people down. But if it gets really big, a boundary is saying, oh, I'm just not gonna, I'm not gonna engage in this, and we're gonna have to leave. That is okay. And we don't have to do it in a mean, harsh way. We can just state it as a matter of fact. And so then once we kind of set these boundaries, again, there might be some discomfort because there might be a little pushback, or somebody might be a little taken aback that we stood up for ourselves. And we can just notice that, like, yep, when we hold a boundary, people might not always like it. And that's okay. And so then do we need to go do something? Do we need to go take a walk around the block? Do we need to go play with the kids for a second? Do we need to do something to just tend to that little bit of discomfort until inevitably it will simmer down? And so those are kind of our steps for mastering uncomfortable conversations, but also really just setting boundaries. So I'm curious, how do those steps feel for the group? Do they feel feasible? Do they feel impossible?
I'll chime in. They make a lot of sense. I think it's easier to say not in the moment how to do these things than in the moment, right? Because
Mm-hmm.
like, especially if it's like, partner's family or whatever, I'm like, you just kind of like, I tend to just kind of say nothing and just like move on to a different topic
Mm-hmm.
opposed to, vocalizing boundaries a lot of the times because it's just like, it feels uncomfortable. But certainly there are times when I wish I did because for sure my mother-in-law, to the point of your example, like I swear every time she sees us, she's like, "Oh, did you guys lose weight?" And I'm like, Why are you saying like please
Right,
stop?"
right.
And
They
and
can't help
worst of all,
themselves.
she said it to me right after like the a few months after our wedding, which was the last time she saw us, and she's like, "Oh, did you lose weight? You look so good." I'm like, "Compared to my wedding?" Like, what?
Yep. Yep. People just can't help themselves. And yet sometimes in the moment, and especially I think as women, like we're expected just to kind of go along to get along and kind of just swallow it and, move forward. Which sometimes that is our best play. Sometimes it's just move forward, ignore, move on. Other times like that, where it's like, this is a consistent thing that's now starting to harm me. It's starting to make me feel really bad. This is where sometimes we can start integrating these boundaries. And I totally agree. Like doing these in the moment is the hardest time to do it. That's why I said, like, start practicing these skills with people that are safe, with people that are actually much easier to hold boundaries with, and just seeing how it feels. Like, it's like, we're just doing practice. We're doing practice boundaries with people that, are maybe our trickiest audiences. And once we start doing it kind of in this practice way, it's a skill. Like we'll start to get better at it and get more confident at it and see what it feels like when we're actually doing it, like in person, doing it live. And so I say like practice and practice in like low stakes situations. And then also it's like, if we can prep ahead. So now Nicole, that your mom is probably going to make a comment about weight. Can we prep ahead of how we're going to respond to her when she inevitably makes that comment? And even sometimes it's like, maybe it's having a conversation before the event and just saying, could you not, would it be okay if you didn't bring this up at Thanksgiving? We can get preventative for it just to get ahead, because often people don't realize, people sometimes don't know that this stuff is causing discomfort or realizing that it's offensive in any way. And sometimes they just need a gentle reminder. And then they'll be able to take it and run with it. So there's ways that we can kind of start doing this in softer ways so that it becomes easier in those harder situations. And yep, so it's like our prep ahead. So it's like thinking about those uncomfortable conversations that might arise. How do we practice holding those boundaries in those conversations? And what can we do to tend to discomfort afterwards? The more we can get ahead of it, the more we can feel not blindsided by it, the easier it will be to do this in practice. And then again, the more that we can practice this in safer relationships, the better we're going to start to get at it. So I would say like everybody just like maybe take a moment, think, are there any uncomfortable conversations that might arise over the next, month and a half? And what are some ways that we can hold some boundaries around that and make it a little bit more comfortable for ourselves? And I would say like, you can even just like jot it down. Unless anybody wants to share any concepts, any ideas that might are already kind of coming up. Awesome. And so then just kind of like some final things to remember. So things to take away from this presentation. And like the first thing is like no one's family is perfect. I think oftentimes we get social media likes to present everybody as this smiling, happy family. Families are extremely complex. They are these living, breathing organisms. They have history, patterns, roles, things that have existed for so long that they are always, always going to be difficulties and complexities in family relationships. And sometimes if we just could acknowledge that on the front end, just by saying like, yep, there might be some hiccups. We're going to go spend time with the family. There might be some hiccups. Sometimes that takes the intensity out of them because we're not expecting it to be perfect. And it doesn't need to be. A family interaction doesn't need to be imperfect for us to still be able to enjoy it. Also acknowledging changing family patterns is hard. As a therapist who has done this for many, many years, family patterns are some of the like most rigid, stubborn things that exist. And there's so many players that tend to keep them in motion. And so if you notice that you're starting to hold these patterns and you're not seeing a lot of change yet, like that is okay. It takes a lot of time and consistency for things to really just start to shift in a family. And so being like kind to yourself of knowing like, I am doing the change that I can, and it is okay if I'm still faced with some of these consequences. I think also acknowledging like it is not always safe to be vulnerable with our families. Sometimes we have people in our families that we love and we can really show all parts of ourselves to, and we feel like we can be open and authentic with them. And that is like incredible. And also there's certain people in our families where we just can't, where when we show too much emotion or vulnerability or difficulty, we get made fun of or we get put down or we're not seen for that. And it's also worth to acknowledge, okay, then maybe those people don't get to see the full version of me, the full scope of who I am. Maybe they get more of the PR version of me. And that is really okay because again, vulnerability should be earned and people should show that they can really hold it and trust it. And so we don't have to give it away freely. And that doesn't mean we can't have relationships with people in our family and people that we love. It's just they maybe don't get 100% of who we are. And that's totally fine. I also think thinking about like making a priorities list. So thinking about the holidays, saying, what do I really want to get out of this? What are my biggest goals or the biggest things I want to make sure happen or my takeaways? Like, do I really want some good quality family time? Are there just certain events that I really want to attend and be able to enjoy? Am I more excited about just rest and recovery and like really wanting to optimize that? I think thinking about what we prioritize and then really making sure that happens, that can kind of take some of the pressure off of the other things. Because as long as maybe we got a good down day of real true rest, then any of the other chaos that happens around it, that's fine. We can tolerate because we got the thing that we feel like is our biggest priority. So I think organizing it like that can be really, really helpful. And then also I say like enjoying the moments of joy. So like families are complex, conflict happens, no relationships exist without conflict, and that is okay. And the way that we can manage through the conflict is we're able to enjoy the good moments together. So when you're able to have a really good back and forth with somebody you love or share a gift with somebody and it sparks so much joy, really just like honing in on that and trying to not think about what's coming next or where we had to be before this, but really just being in the moment with that joy, that can be kind of enough to get through any of the hardship that we might see otherwise. So those are just my few things to remember as we're getting through the holiday season. And so then that's kind of the end of my 101 navigating families through the holidays. I know that was a lot of information, and also everybody's families are different and complex. But curious if anybody has any questions, anything anybody wants to talk about, or just kind of throw up. Happy to answer kind of any questions or thoughts or comments.
I think this was great, and there's just so many layers of all of it. So, like, it's like, are you good at boundaries? I'm like, no. But then I'm like, sometimes. And it was just good
Mhm.
to see different areas of that and like knowing that that's kind of normal. Cause I'm like, sometimes I'm super rigid, but like, I think that I just, it's like the reader thing. I'm like, people know what's going on in my life. I'm like, oh, never mind. They know. And I have to communicate through it. You know what I mean? And then it's like,
Mhm.
sometimes I'm super, I guess, porous and I like just spit out everything that comes in my mouth and like comes in my head. I'm like, so I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but I just think it's good to see different things and also like what you just touched on about families. Like sometimes I feel like yeah, you can definitely like it's like oh I overshared there, and I don't think that's like exactly what I should have done. you
Mhm.
know? Yeah. So I can totally relate.
Yep. No, I completely agree. And it's like, again, it's like talking about families. Families are they're so complex. Everybody's family is different, and also relationships are so complex. We exist differently with different people, and that's actually very healthy. So yeah, it's like our boundaries don't always look the same, and they don't always have to be the same with every person. There's allowed to be like flexibility there and like nuance because relationships are nuanced. None of this stuff is easy. I love that comment. Any other questions for me? Any questions about kind of, yeah, family dynamics, boundary things, therapy questions in general?
Well, after this, we'll definitely share your email and information and everything for everybody on the call and to like the our org in general. I think this is, very, I love that we're adding this programming. It's definitely extremely relevant, I think, to everybody. But yeah, then, if anybody didn't want to speak up or whatever, we'll make contact information sent out so you can discuss further, book a session, something like that. I'm not sure. If you're even taking more patients, but like, if that what that looks like, we can you guys can connect on that further.
Yes, so definitely. So yeah, feel free to reach out. Like I'm super accessible. I love talking to people about therapy and their life and supporting people, even just if you're interested in the therapy process. Um, I know it's like always a spectrum, and I think it can be so helpful. So I am always available. Yep. So if you Google calmmindtherapy.org, our website shows up. You can like read more about us. We're a pretty small team, but this is kind of what we do. And yeah, any questions, you can reach out to me directly, or if anything kind of has come up from this and you want, you're mulling it over and need some more feedback, I'm more than happy to share.
Thanks everybody for joining. This was great. Thank you, Meg, for the session. And yeah, just keep looking at all the events, guys, coming up. We have so much in December. So I hope to see you guys. And thanks for making the time tonight.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone. I appreciate
Perfect.
it.
Bye.
Thank you so much.